From London, I'm John Weeks, and this is The Standard. The King has made his speech to Parliament, marking the new Labour government's plans for the country.
Stability will be the cornerstone of my government's economic policy, and every decision will be consistent with its fiscal rules. It will legislate to ensure that all significant tax and spending changes are subject to an independent assessment by the Office for Budget Responsibility.
The speech, put together by our new PM Sir Keir Starmer, promised a return to serious government with a vow for security, opportunity, prosperity and justice for every person. In total, 40 bills were unveiled, including proposals to speed up the planning process to help build 1.5 million more homes over 5 years, legislation to establish Great British Railways to improve train services, and new rights for renters. So, what does the King's speech reveal about Labour's future outlook? And how aligned is it with the Labour manifesto? Joining us now is our Deputy Political Editor Jitendra Joshi and Chief Political Correspondent Rachael Burford. So, the King has spoken. First of all, what are the sort of key elements of his speech today, and what did they tell us about the government's plans for the country?
Well, they tell us that Keir Starmer and this new Labour government are putting flesh on the bones of their central promise of the election campaign, which was to revitalise economic growth after what they say has been a very disappointing period under the Conservatives when growth, investment and productivity all lagged. And as a result of that, everyone's been feeling paying the price from a lack of funding in public services and so on. So that's really job one for the government. They wanted to convey in this speech to use this as a sort of overarching framework to cement their policies around house building, around new measures to create growth through more powers for local leaders, updating the planning system and so forth, as well as some of the key promises they made in the manifesto, such as on workers' rights, bringing the rail operators back under state control over time, punishing water companies that are polluting our waters. These were all really cardinal promises made by Keir Starmer. And we mustn't forget some of the history. It's quite striking that we're hearing this all expressed in through the mouth of the King, delivering only his second speech at a state opening, and this is the first time we're seeing this occasion happen under a Labour government since 2009, and you have to go all the way back to 1950 for the last time there was actually a King's speech with a Labour Prime Minister.
And we know 40 bills were announced. Were there any surprises, or was it all pretty much as expected?
There were not many surprises, actually. All the things that they'd sort of promised during the general election campaign, things on crime, banning zombie knives, renters reform bills, that was all in there. What was not in there, though, was votes for 16 and 17-year-olds, which was something that had been sort of put out by Keir Starmer during the election campaign. He said he'd give younger people the right to vote. That has been missed out of the King's speech. I think the Prime Minister did sort of hint it may be missed out, earlier saying, there was other things they needed to get done first. Growth was their big promise, and that's their sort of big thing they want to focus on at the moment.
And obviously, the King's speech is Sir Keir's words or sentiments spoken through the King's mouth. But did King Charles appear hopeful at all about this new government?
Well, it would be extremely remiss of him to express any emotion whatsoever as a constitutional monarch. It's always quite funny when we all grew up with the Queen, and she was famously straight-laced, with observing all the constitutional proprieties. And although the King is perhaps more outspoken on certain things, especially on environmental policy, ever since ascending the throne, he's very much stuck to the script. And the script is sometimes a little bit awkward, when you hear the monarch talking about my government's legislative programme will be mission-led. It's slightly jarring, but it is what it is. That those are, everyone understands they're not his words, they're the government's.
So honing in on the capital then, what could these Labour plans mean for London?
Right at the core of the King's Speech is homes, house building and rights for renters. So the Renters' Rights Bill that was announced, or proposed I should say, is I think going to be pretty relevant to London, because obviously we've got huge numbers of renters here, highest rents in the country. I think City Hall say that a 2-bed, the average price of a 2-bed now in London is £1,600 a month. So it did sort of really lay out what this government planned to do for renters. So that's like strengthening tenants' rights and protections, abolishing Section 21, which is no-fault evictions. They want to, put curbs on this idea of landlords being able to force their tenants out by upping the rent by huge amounts, stop bidding wars by estate agents, and then also sort of cracking down on rogue landlords who let their tenants stay in these homes that may be hazardous with mould and all sorts of terrible conditions, because there's so few homes that tenants have fewer rights, because if they complain they may be kicked out and someone is just there to step in and replace them straight away. So I think all these sort of new powers that are proposed for local authorities and to crack down on landlords are going to be quite important for the capital.
So what happens next, guys? How and when might we see the effects of these new bills?
Yeah, I mean, nothing's going to happen overnight. Some of this is pretty ambitious and long-term planning. So on housing, all the stuff that Rachael's outlined can be done fairly quickly, but then there are longer-term issues to address the building side of things. 1.5 million homes over the next 5 years, that takes time. But in the here and now, in terms of the parliamentary procedure here, the Commons will start debating all these measures today, Wednesday, and that debate will last several days. And it's the first chance really since the election for all sides to really carve out some dividing lines. And what's really interesting actually, as much as Keir Starmer and the Labour government are looking forward, they're also still slightly in campaign mode. They're still reminding everyone this is the mess that we're inheriting, as they would say. Keir Starmer said today that the economic chaos that people have endured since Liz Truss, in his words, will never happen again with my Labour government. So you'll see that really take shape over the coming days, a debate about what's happened, why it's everyone else's mess, why the Tories messed everything up, and why we're now going to have to, we Labour that is, are now going to have to spend the next weeks, months and years even fixing it.
Let's take a quick break now. In part 2, Robert Dex explains the latest in the Strictly Come Dancing controversy.
The top brass at the B will, I imagine, do practically anything to keep this show going.
Welcome back. Now, we turn our attention to Strictly Come Dancing, which has made headlines this year after the BBC launched a misconduct probe into professional dancer Giovanni Panice and removed fellow pro Graziano Di Prima. Allegations about the pair have led to the BBC announcing that chaperones will be assigned to Strictly stars during their dance rehearsals from this year's series. Our arts correspondent Robert Dex has been looking into the story, and he joins us now. So Rob, first of all, what is the context behind this decision to bring in chaperones for the Strictly stars?
It's been sort of rumbling on for a little while now, and obviously the BBC have decided to try to cut it off before it gets any further. And it's basically about the teaching and training methods of the professional dancers, who are obviously partnered up with celebrities to teach them, to get them up to pretty high standards pretty quickly before they go on TV for the nation to see how they are dancing. I mean, it's worth saying, I think, given the nature of the show, people just tend to see the performance on the night, and it's smooth and there's music and there's lights. And I think a lot of people maybe don't appreciate the absolute physical nature of dancing. You ever meet a dancer, ask to see their bruises, they will be covered in bruises. It's massively physical. It's really hard work. And on top of that, there's the pressure of squeezing years and years and years of teaching into a few months, basically, and then going in front of millions of people to try to show off what you've learned or what you haven't learned. So you can imagine this is an intense experience anyway. So yes, we've had allegations about one of the professionals called Giovanni Panice, which he denies. We've had Zara McDermott, who was a contestant on the show, a reality TV star, talk about her experiences. She was partnered with another professional, Graziano Di Prima, who's left. She complained about her treatment on the show, but she was also worried about talking about it and, opening up about it, and there being a public backlash, which I think is just due to the nature of the show. It's so popular. I mean, Di Prima has said, I think he said something like, he brings intense passion and determination to win, and admits that might have affected his training regime, and said he deeply regrets what happened, and he's now left the show. So I think you can imagine that sort of intense training, intense pressure could spill over, and will certainly affect different people in different ways. And we've seen today reports that the BBC are looking at similar allegations into a third dancer who's not been named as well. So this one is going to run and run, as they say.
And do you think the show could end up being cancelled by the BBC if further allegations do come to the surface?
I mean, I think that's why they brought in these measures, haven't they? In other words, the dancers and the professionals are never going to be alone. There's always going to be people in the room with them. They're going to have increased, welfare checks and support. The BBC will not want to cancel this. It is a massive hit. It brings in millions of viewers. It brings in an awful lot of money. It's one of the flagship shows. The BBC would, I imagine, rather do anything but cancel it. I mean, I remember years ago, there used to be a debate, BBC, ITV, sort of Saturday night family entertainment, and ITV just wiped the floor with the BBC. Nobody watched anything on the BBC. They tried with different game shows or sitcoms and never got it right. All these shows that lasted barely a series, and while ITV just basically put Ant and Dec and everything and had the X Factor and just wiped the floor with them. Strictly put BBC back in that game, if you know what I mean, and they started winning a huge audience. So the top brass at the Beeb will, I imagine, do practically anything to keep this show going.
And how do you think this BBC controversy compares with others in the past?
I think it seems to have got a bit less coverage and a bit less heat on the BBC. I mean, that may be because, details haven't spilled out yet, and that may change. But I think if I was at the BBC and I was being very cynical, which I'm sure nobody at the BBC would be, they'd be quite pleased about world events, UK elections, US elections, people trying to assassinate US presidential leaders, wars in Ukraine. There's been a lot of news going on the last few weeks, the last few months, which maybe just means that this story hasn't had the focus it maybe otherwise would have. I think you could maybe say that the change of government, one of the first things the new Culture Secretary said was that she believes in the licence fee. That comes after years of BBC bashing, essentially, from various culture secretaries under the last administration. So maybe there's just a feeling that the BBC is not quite the political football that can be kicked quite so easily. I don't know, we will see. This could yet blow up much further. But at the moment, the BBC seem to be handling it, seem to be containing it, and we will see what the future brings. Reality TV has been with us quite a while, hasn't it now? And certainly when it first started, when these shows, it started with, Big Brother, Pop Stars, Love Island, whatever, TV executives thought it was wonderful because essentially you didn't have to pay a cast. You got members of the public to be the cast for you, pulled in huge numbers of viewers, massive commercial success. And I think we've started to see the downside of it a wee bit. We had all that problem with Love Island, and ITV had to sort of say, we're rowing back perhaps on changing how we do things here, and we're going to put duty of care far more prominently. You had stuff like contestants complaining about, how they were seen, how things were edited. You had obviously some fairly awful stories about former contestants who went on to commit suicide. So I think there has been a swing, if you like, towards what the broadcasters owe the people who go on these shows, and duty of care is becoming more and more and more important.
Pick up the Evening Standard newspaper for more news, interviews and analysis, or head to standard.co.uk. Thanks for listening. We're back tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock.